Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal Podcast. We are continuing in our series of discussions with contributors to the Transhumanist New Deal, and also specifically contributors in the life sciences and longevity studies. I'm here with Dr. Ilia Stambler, director at Shmuel Harafeh, and the Movement for Longevity and Quality of Life, and chief science officer of VETEC. Dr. Stambler, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. I'm very excited to talk about your chapter in the Transhumanist Handbook. As our viewers know, we've been doing this companion piece for the Transhumanist Handbook that will be available for free with an introduction of a few minutes of each of the chapters from the contributors to that work. And so we are talking about Chapter 21. What do we need to know to treat degenerative aging as a medical condition to extend healthy lifespan? Give us a quick breakdown of that chapter, if you don't mind, Dr. Stan.
All right. So the title says most of it. What do we need to know to treat degenerative aging to extend our healthy lifespan? First of all, we need to know that we need to treat degenerative aging as a medical condition to extend our healthy lifespan, right? Because this knowledge is not yet common knowledge. If go to healthcare system, they still treat every disease as an entity and every symptom as an entity. And what we are proposing with the whole longevity movement is proposing is that we actually address the entire multimorbidity, the entire aging-related ill health, by intervention into the degenerative aging process. So when you have this realization, the next question is how? What do we actually need to know practically? So it is not enough to say, okay, let's cure aging, let's treat aging as a disease or as a medical condition. You have to actually need to understand the technical difficulties that can be involved. Many times life extensionists are kind of too optimistic or too naive. They think that if you throw a lot of billions of dollars into the task, that the problem will be solved. No, you actually have to dig very deep into the aging process, understand what it means to age, what it means to measure the aging process, what it means to measure the interventions, how different parts of the aging process are related, how the biological aging process is related to the environment, to the society, the all kinds of integrations that need to be made if you want to really address this problem in a reliable and responsible way. So that's basically the gist of my chapter. I urge us to learn more about the topic, raise some methodological issues. For example, do we treat aging as a process or as a state? All kinds of technicalities we need to understand before we even try to really address aging as a medical problem. So basically, yes, I'm also very optimistic about our ability to treat aging as a disease, as a medical issue, and yes, extend our health longevity. But I'm arguing that this will be very difficult, and we need to be prepared for a very long road ahead. So that's basically the purpose of this chapter.
Yes, and people who are familiar with the Transhumanist Party are well aware that the number one of our three core principles relates to life extension. And so I say this to maybe encourage people to make a point as you're looking through this handbook of reading the chapters about from medical professionals, you're a medical man, who have a lot of insights into this. There's a lot of wonderful chapters in this book, but I do believe that the life extension area is foremost in many of our minds. Now, I spoke a few days ago to Joe Bardeen, who's the communication director of RADFest, and he expressed a concern, which is similar to some of the ideas that you've described here, that there is a difference between the way that our society and the way that people in the life sciences approach aging and approach other medical concerns, and that we should maybe have less of a disparity between these two approaches. You've touched upon this. Could you expand upon it further?
Yes, definitely. Actually, my chapter could be renamed the need for integration to treat degenerative aging as a medical condition to extend health lifespan, because what we really need is to integrate. We need to understand the fundamental, profound aging process. We need to understand how they relate to diseases, to symptoms, as well as to the society, to the healthcare system, to the security system. So basically, we need to become yogis. Yogi translates as a unifier, as integrator. So we need to integrate all the different aspects in our approach to aging. So yes, it is very basic, and I'm also a member of the executive board of the International Society on Aging and Disease. It is a large international professional/advocacy organization arguing for aging research. As you can see in the name, we need to connect aging with diseases, with particular diseases. That will be a major step in advancing the life extension field.
Yes, yes. I spoke to Ira Pastor also a few days ago in coordination with the same project, and he has a lot of insights into the private sector and research and development in pharmaceutical business specifically. But a lot of our talk was focused. Some part of our talk was focused on public sector efforts and public visibility, an area that you have described very eloquently here, versus institutional concerns and private sector concerns. How do you weigh all of these efforts moving forward to make the best use of? In the United States, healthcare spending is $7 trillion. How do we make the best use of these monies?
Right. I think I relate to this as well in this book, but I have another book. This one I make a little self-promotion. I don't know if you know this. Longevity Promotion Multidisciplinary Perspectives. And here I have a whole section with several chapters specifically on this issue. How do we make policies for various stakeholders, for various types of institutions, for the private sector, for the government, for the public sector, because they really need to work in synergy. They really need to help each other, but sometimes there are conflicts of interest. For example, private interest is not always interested in investing in fundamental research, which is sometimes very necessary for developing life extension technologies. So they want the solution here and now. On the other hand, academics may be too averse to risk taking, and they wouldn't mind studying some problems for 30, 50 years without coming up with any actual treatment. So we need to balance all the interest, all the involvement. So yes, that's again a task of integration that we have to address. But we need to understand that basically all the sectors of our society, industry, academy, government, society at large are vitally interested in this topic, or should be vitally interested, because our life is at stake. So basically, we need to work out some ways to work together.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, I did a podcast. I'm referencing people who I hopefully our readers don't tire of me always referencing folks. But I did a podcast with Paul Spiegel, and we talked quite a bit about the possibility, in a few words, of a public health service that is more oriented towards preventative medicine in aging. In talking about these big numbers that the United States and other developed countries spend on healthcare, we can shift that money to preventative measures and oversight through public health services, and get a lot better outcomes for a lot less money. Would you care to speak to the state of that in your experience, or more broadly, specifically aging and public health services?
That's exactly right. The United States is the perfect example of all the problems we're having. You guys really spend $3 trillion on healthcare, so-called healthcare. Actually, spend on disease, mostly aging-related disease. while the percentage that goes to intervention, both research and intervention, is just about 1% or so. That's the statistics for the United States. That's completely out of proportion. It's completely insane. So yes, even before we get into all the complexities, into all these integrations, we need to understand the basic fact that we need to invest more in prevention than in treating those diseases when they're already, they're insanely costly, and crippling our healthcare and then our social security system and the entire society. So yes, we need to focus on prevention first of all. There are some things that could be done at a very low cost, some changes in basic lifestyle, and of course also invest in research to develop even more effective means. So yes, this is the main basic point of our advocacy. Let's invest in prevention. That's what anti-aging, what longevity movement is all about. To try to prevent aging-related diseases before they arrive, before they become severe, chronic, by intervention into aging. So that if people realize just that, that's enough to move forward.
Yes, yes. And at the risk of veering a little bit into the political, I'd like to get your opinion on something. Your country and other developed countries, they stand in stark contrast to the United States. The United States does not have a national public health service. These services are limited to specific sectors, old retired people and low-income people, essentially. And this is an area that has public opinion has shifted dramatically. About 80% of people in the United States now support effectively Medicare for all, as it's termed. And do you think that we have opportunities to continue with the extent to which these things are privatized in a country like the U.S. To have longevity interventions coming to market for ordinary people, or do you think that the United States has to fix this problem of not having a public health service first?
Yes, you definitely need a well-developed public health service. If you leave longevity medicine just to private sector, the best thing, it will be available to a very small percentage of people. So you have to socialize it at the very early stage, even at the research stage. That's what we advocate here in Israel, to increase the proportion of public spending, public programs, because that way people will have entitlement to these therapies, even before they emerge. If the state invests in this kind of therapies, then the people have the entitlement. Otherwise, it will be in the possession of the top few rich people. So
yes, very upsetting thing.
Yeah,
a very upsetting prospect, and income inequality in the United States and similar concerns of this kind, they're very much coming to a head. People are very distraught that we are not able to do right by our citizens here. I'll shift gears for a moment. We talked about the idea of oversight and the idea of interventions becoming an ordinary part of people's experience, a background kind of experience. Something there's a lot of ways to look at something like this. Your country is better than the United States in this regard, in the running of a public health service generally. I would say head and shoulders better. There are other countries that I've described, been lucky enough to speak to people in different terms. I spoke to a gentleman named Florian Marcus from Estonia, and he's an Estonia emissary for e-governance. And we spoke at great length about some of these various digitalization projects, of which there are many in this country. But one of the net results of this high level of digitalization and e-services is that they are starting to be able to also incorporate this into their public health service. Now, Estonia is a small country. Israel a little bit larger in size, but similar in size. Do you think that in your country that you could have a full digitalization in public health service? Is that a realistic prospect?
Well, Israel already have full digitalizations for about 30 years. Our HMOs, our health management organizations, have electronic medical records since the 1980s. So Israel is fully digitalized. The whole healthcare is completely digitalized, and now all those HMOs and also other agencies are working with this data to develop some predictors and some analytics for also for health interventions. So Israel is on it, and this is actually seen as one of the major assets of Israel that will allow it to become a global leader in healthcare. So that's one of the things that Israel is very strongly involved in. Generally, the public healthcare system is very strong in Israel. I can say that all our medicine is completely socialized, and it's good healthcare. It's not like if there's any loss of quality. That's perfect, excellent medical care. Israel is in the 5th place in healthy life expectancy. The general life expectancy is about 82 and a half years. It's in the first in the top 10 countries of the world, a little less than countries like Switzerland and Japan, and also in health and healthy life expectancy, we're in the first place. The healthy life expectancy is in 73 years. It's just a 9 years difference. There's still work to do, to improve both parameters, but Israel is quite good. And I think the main reason is that we have public, public healthcare, and as well as digitalization, also some preventive services, and generally the attitude to health is quite strong.
Yes. So having done that due diligence as a society of having a modernized public health service, having the digitalization, how do you see it moving more into a more robust use of data science to assess every individual person's health in a regular and systematic way, personalized medicine being provided? Where do you let's talk about maybe a good condition, better conditions in the not too distant future, even though of course your country is among the leaders in this area.
Right. So one of the chief challenges is to improve the shareability of data, the interoperability of data, because a lot of people like to hoard their data. Even those HMOs, they work for their data, they see it as their personal asset, and they do make a lot of money out of it. But if we really want this field to advance, so we need to think of ways to share the data as much as possible between organizations, from the organizations to people. So the main challenge is sharing. And if we succeed, then I believe we will be able to develop quite effective therapies quite soon. And there are movements in this direction in Israel. Now, with the sharing, there comes another concern about privacy. If you want every people's data to be available for research, there are all kinds of privacy concerns, so that's a little bit of a balance. But generally, we need more data and more shareable data. And Israel is working on this very hard. There is now a new program which is quite well funded in Israeli terms, at least for personalized medicine. It's actually a national master plan for personalized medicine. Now, in terms of longevity, we need to introduce more the preventive aspect into this, the treatment of aging. But generally, the Israel is developing in this direction.
And you mentioned in your chapter a term, a standardization of anti-aging diagnostics, and some similar concepts. Would you care to expand on some of these ideas in this public health service context?
That's right. That's also one of the crucial problems here. Probably as important as the problem of shareability and interoperability, because if you don't have any standards, everybody can use any technique possible. On the one hand, it's good and improves cooperation and variety. Competition, variety. On the other hand, you do need to have some standards to see that some therapy is actually producing the effects. So that's the basics of regulation. You need standards to judge the effectiveness of your therapies, and you have to agree on those standards, because right now almost every researcher has a panel of biomarkers of his own, and there's no consensus, and everybody assesses whatever he wants. Like in physics, we have those standards, like a kilogram is a kilogram and a meter is a meter. So when you want to create some engineering technology, you don't have differences in in your measurements. But in biology, generally in aging research, it's every man for himself, and it's a problem that we have to somehow overcome by consultation, by trying to come to a consensus. What are the standards of care? What are the standards of measurements? That's an issue that we need to pay great attention to.
Yes, thank you. Yes, you mentioned in your chapter a quote which I very much enjoyed. You said that we are undertaking lifespan and longevity efforts not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Quoting John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Most of our listeners probably familiar with those inspiring words. Now, I am not a medical man, and I do not have your training. Many of our listeners they have an ardent interest in radical life extension. What would be your advice to ordinary folks to help elevate this discussion? Maybe in the area that we talked about aging versus ending those barriers between aging and other interventions, but maybe more broadly. What would be your advice to people in building a consensus to this end?
First of all, we need to get people interested, even interested in this field and treating aging. That's the primary task. From that, all the other things will develop, because if you want to extend a healthy longevity, you will think of ways to do this. But if you don't even have this goal, there's no starting point. There's no point of reference there. So we really need to educate people about the importance of intervention into aging, extension of healthy longevity. People should want longevity like they want health, right? All the people of the world want to be healthy. Now we need to educate them that they want to live long and healthy. It's a different kind of mindset. It's thinking for the long term. It's taking care of prevention. So it's a bit of a different paradigm that we need to introduce to replace the old curative paradigm. So that's a start, and then there are all kinds of things that every person can do. Starting from just taking care of your own health. Living long enough to live even longer. Just the basic things that people should do, and then there are also most importantly is to learn about the field. Even the popular level, share news on Facebook. Because from this kind of interest, even the professional community will get encouragement, because they'll see that there is interest. Also, if there are political initiatives in support of the field, that people should obviously support those initiatives, like your party, some of the non-party affiliated advocacy initiatives. We have a lot of those NGOs who promote longevity. That people should join them, should support them. So yeah, we basically, very shortly, we need to build the longevity movement. Right now, it is still a few people here and there. No comparison to what was 10 or 15 years ago. Back then, it was just really a few people scattered around the globe. Now we are in our thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Still, we are not near becoming a really impactful global movement, and I hope we need to create this movement.
Mm-hmm. And in recent times, our friend Jose Cordero received a substantive number of votes in an election as a longevity candidate. Another candidate in Germany received something like 70,000 votes, a longevity candidate. What is your assessment of the state of political organizing for longevity in Israel or elsewhere? We mentioned our political party. We could speak of the USDP or more broadly. What areas do you see growing? What areas would you be wanting us to do better in?
Yes, that's the area that we advance very actively, and where I'm involved very strongly. I've been involved in this about 10 years in Israel. Back in 2012, we approached the Knesset with this proposal, to establish a national advisory committee on the subject, and we have been very active ever since. We don't go as a political party. We considered it, but we didn't have the resources to organize it. So we go as mainly as lobbyists, as advocacy groups, and actually we are quite successful. Just a few months ago, actually just a few weeks ago, there was published the Israel National Master Plan on Aging, and we were able to introduce a section on enhancing research, development, and education for the promotion of health and longevity and prevention of aging-related diseases into this national master plan. And that was completely through advocacy, non-partisan, non-party affiliated advocacy. We organized a few meetings in Knesset. We approached the parliament members, the relevant decision makers, governmental officials. So yeah, it's in the program. There were issued several calls for research proposals. Thanks to this raising awareness and advocacy, some real money that researchers in Israel get from various ministries. So there are also some binational programs that we were able to establish, like the Bayrak's Aging, Britain-Israel Research and Academic Exchange on Aging. That is also a binational support grant program that we were able to advance. So basically, we were not affiliated as a party, but we do advance the field, in political terms. And I'm also very hopeful that after the election in Knesset, which will be just in a few days on September 17, we will continue activity. There are some hopes that some of the parties will be more supportive of this goal. So basically, that's our way. But of course, I encourage also political parties. It's also very powerful leverage. Even if they don't get the necessary votes right now, still they raise this topic on the public agenda, and other parties want to emulate, want to steal the idea from them. And I think that's great. The more competition, the more interest in the field, the better we advance.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful achievement. My running partner and friend Kimberly Forsyth in this election, she's actually in the process of doing something on a smaller scale, but she's working with a government-run incubator in Estonia, and she's advanced to the next level with a public health initiative around senolytics and personalized medicine. Very pleased to see her doing this, and excited to be involved in that. So now, some people, in looking at what the USTP is doing at initiatives of this kind, they have described a criticism that we should be focusing more of our efforts on longevity, but from a nonpartisan or even post-partisan perspective, focusing on policy advocacy outside of specifically trying to get people elected to office, something a little more maybe technocratic. Do you this specifically this criticism of being nonpartisan and more focused on life extension? Do you think this is a fair criticism of political parties, including the USTP?
Do you mean should the transhumanist, the life extensionist, longevity parties be more involved in other types of issues apart from life extension, apart from techno-progressivism? Am I getting?
No, maybe moving away from general techno-progressivism and towards a life extension, and maybe advocating in different ways. So people have suggested a political action committee for life extension. People have suggested other approaches than this sort of organizing that we see this idea of a post-partisan. I'll give an example. I interviewed a gentleman, Max Kay, and he's the founder in Australia of an organization called the Flux Party, and they are an iVoting, a blockchain voting organization, but they're not seeking to replace any other party. They just want their digitalization services to become a part of the civil society in the best way possible. And I see life extension as being a more important goal, in my view. And I wonder if there's similar post-partisan approaches, different ways of looking at the problem, I guess.
Okay, right. I don't know if you know, but I was one of the founders of the International Longevity Party back in 2012. It wasn't actually registered anywhere, but the movement that we started back in 2012 was explicitly political at first. We heard all those kinds of criticism that why are you a single issue party? Why don't you engage this issue and that issue? Do we even need a party? So we had all those arguments back then. Back then, I strongly argued that the longevity parties do have a value, specifically to raise this point of life extension. Because if we don't raise it, it will be dissolved. It will just go under the radar. So I argued that there's value in longevity parties. But then this very word focusing is a bit harmful. What does it mean? Do we know how to? Do we have a 100% foolproof recipe to achieve life extension? No, we try all kinds of things. If your heart is with starting a party, go with it. If you want to start an advocacy group, do that. Whatever works for you, whatever your resources are. So as long as our goal is to extend healthy lifespan for everybody, all kinds of approaches are good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, some people have reproached the USTP. I think of a gentleman that I interviewed named David Kelly, who was he feels that the USTP is we should be diverting efforts into a less political things, but it is very much an either-or proposition. And I agree with what you said that a policy club does create a sort of volunteer army, and that is something that if you were to create with a top-down power structure is very, very costly to be doing similar kind of work. So yes, I like this idea that we should be open to many, many avenues across the life sciences and also across political sciences. That's very, very well said. Well, I really did enjoy your chapter in this book, and I would encourage people to please be looking at this chapter and at all of the chapters that relate to life extension in this book. There's a lot of material to get through, and this is a really wonderful addition to this work. A moment ago we mentioned that life extension in some areas. We are. I think of just a few years ago. This is not a medical breakthrough, but it was a moment for me when Ray Kurzweil became the CTO of Google. Ray Kurzweil, a person who has, among many other things, a long-standing track record of supporting life extension. That moment, to me, was a time when I said, it seems like life extension may be well on the horizon for us. In a way that it had not quite hit home with me before. But you mentioned a moment ago that there's still a great room for improvements. You use the term magic bullet therapies in your chapter. Would you care to describe any areas where you think that people's thinking on this subject might be too reductive? I spoke to Michael Rose on this subject in brief. But we didn't get a chance to do a full podcast. So I thought I might pass that question on to you.
Right. So a lot of people would just love to take a pill, especially if it's a very cheap one or even a free, and then be done with it. The problem is there's probably not going to be any such pill. There'll probably a very complex, very involved, multifaceted, multifactorial intervention on all kinds of levels: the cellular level, the regulatory level, the environmental level. So we need to get smart before we think of intervening into the aging process. That's also the main point of my book, of my chapter. But a lot of people would love a simplistic approach, just pop up a pill and live forever. Wouldn't be nice. Unfortunately, it will probably not be possible. So yeah, we need to understand that it is feasible generally, scientifically, it is feasible to extend healthy lifespan. There's no law in nature that prohibits it, but we'll still need to learn a lot and understand a lot of connections, a lot of integrations to be able to do this. So yes, I also agree with Professor Rose that we need a more holistic rather than reductionist approach, but we also need the reductionism. See, we need an integration between reductionism and holism. We need both to understand the mechanisms, and we need to see everything as a whole. So it's a tough problem, this intervention into aging, but I hope we can make it if we put our minds to it.
And in thinking about this idea that is the crux of your chapter, this one of the key ideas of your chapter, that there is a barrier between aging and medical research generally in people's minds. Some kind of taboos come to mind. As everyone knows, in the pre-industrial world, human lifespans were about a quarter of what they are today in the developed world. And in the course of this change, human beings were not making some Faustian bargain that led to them living longer. It was a more natural and accepted progression. And yet I think people have a mental block about longevity today that may be a part of this reason why we still have these separate camps, aging and medical research more generally. Would you care to speak to this subject of people's mental blocks on the subject of aging?
Right. There are also many mental blocks, even ideological blocks. So in my book, the promotion, I also have a chapter on that. The frequently asked questions about health span and lifespan extension, because all those questions are pretty standard. What about overpopulation? What about boredom? What about this? About that? So all these questions have been answered. It's if anybody asks you, just send them a link to the frequently asked question.
We will.
And to my book. And but there are many. I'm not disparaging. I'm not condescending. People do have those concerns, and they stem from a very long tradition of thought. Where people got used to the fact that there is nothing we can do about aging, about extending our life. So they developed all kinds of rationalizations that they use. And as advocates, what we need to do is to explain to them, to educate them that it is possible to. I see gradually the perspective changes. Even in 10 years ago, there was much greater proportion of people who were completely averse to this idea, or completely completely ignorant. Now it's almost the mainstream. It's not yet the mainstream, but it's getting there. So just recently, a couple of days ago, we had a conference in Weizmann Institute with representatives of several ministries in our government. Not radical life extension, of course, just intervention to aging and healthy life extension. A complete understanding, no problem. Yeah, that's the reasonable thing to do. So of course it depends on how you present it. If you are too naive or too optimistic, you have to present things rationally in a balanced way. But generally, we're getting to the mainstream. I estimate it will take another year or two that pretty much everybody in the world will understand this possibility, and then we'll actually need to get to work how to do this, right? How to develop the actual therapies. But in terms of mental blocks, I think we were beginning to overcome them in many cases. So I'm positive in this regard.
Mm-hmm. And I would recommend that people do pick up this book. I think I have a link to the sale of this book on Amazon, and we'll link to that or as it's available.
Right, I'm maybe harming my financial interest, but if you want a printed copy, you're welcome to buy it on Amazon. But I made it available on my website, longevityhistory.com, as well as my other book on the history of life extension research. So you can go there and download it, and
Perfect. We'll have that available in the comments. Well, it's an aside, but I was talking to someone about this companion piece, which will be available for free online, and they said we can also. I've made some DVDs in the past and for other folks. And it's not a difficult thing for me to make a DVD of the companion piece available as well. So might also have be making that available in that form as well. Can you tell us? Wow, I lost my train of thought. I'll be editing around that for a moment. I apologize. Or do you have any concerns with in the United States? There's a lot of talk about the changes in right to try laws, and how we've made some incremental moves towards a right to try. A slightly better situation for the U.S., but it's not a full right to try. It's in a very limited cases that it's allowable. Do you have any observations on that situation in the U.S. or on any concerns about regulation as it relates to longevity, safety versus efficacy from a regulatory perspective?
Right. As I also mentioned in the chapter, also in the book, that is not an easy question. Really, we still need a massive academic and public consultation. What should be the regulation for anti-aging, for longevity therapies? That's not easy. Right to try is just the one thing, an important advancement, but that's for people who are already on the deathbed mainly. We need to think of regulations for people who are not yet sick. That's the whole goal of the longevity medicine, right? To intervene into aging before it turns into a disease. That's not simple. It would seem like giving pills to healthy people, and that too can raise some ethical concerns. So that's not easy. Methodological, it's not easy. And of course, beside even for the terminal people, beside the right to try, which is great, there's also the question of pricing. You know, the prices that the pharma companies want to completely unjustify, completely insane. So we need to put some brakes on that in some way. Some people argue against socialization of prices, the curbs competition. I think that they'll have enough, if they have some of their appetites reduced a little bit. So yeah, there are lots of.
It's a serious concern. Drug prices have skyrocketed in the United States, even for more commonplace treatments that have been around for many decades. The cost of insulin has gone steadily up in recent decades, and many other commonplace medical breakthroughs that the developers intended for them to remain at a lower cost, and some of these things are being exploited to in a very real way in the United States, and there's one of the many great sources of the tension that I described in the United States. It's led to this a more robust call for a public health service in the United States. And talking about this idea of the affordability, do you see that no one has a crystal ball, but do you see that these prices? I think of myself as someone who is a believer in some kind of techno-singularitarian effects, but it's very difficult to put a timeline on that, and that kind of thinking can give people a kind of external locus of control, not concerning themselves as much with trying to promote a longevity advocacy because they have a sense, some kind of magical thinking on the subject. Do you see that in thinking again, maybe principally of the United States with our high costs, and do you see that these prices can come down in the private sector? Do you think that that we really need to adjust this system to a public sector phenomenon?
That's exactly the right way to ask the question, because a lot of people really see some kind of global trends that are independent of our agency, independent of their effort. A lot of people ask me, when will we see the therapies? if you don't invest anything in it, if you don't work on it, you'll never see the therapies. And also regarding the increase in life expectancy, there is no law of nature that says that the life expectancy will increase. In the United States, the life expectancy is already steady, mostly because of mortality in the younger people. But generally, the life expectancy in the United States is steady or even declining. So there is no godly plan for life expectancy to increase or for technologies to develop if people will not invest their time and effort in it. So I always say that we really have to understand it's all in our hands. Also regarding the prices, if we just ignore this issue and hope that prices will just drop by themselves because of all those wonderful technological singularitarian developments. No, even with those developments, they will be able to take whatever price they want if they're allowed to. So a lot of it is in our hands. So we really need to develop policies. We really need to advocate. And that way, I hope we'll get those therapies sooner to.
You are someone who has a broad spectrum of knowledge and experience with work in medical fields, organizing on the political sides of things, and through other institutions and organizations. What do you say to concerns about fundraising? The USTP is at present a non-monetary organization, and we don't intend to make a big transition in that regard at this time. But sometimes it is one of the criticisms that from people like David Kelly that I mentioned before, in talking about leveraging a person like yourself is, as you mentioned in the initiative that you described, is well poised to be advancing data science and longevity interventions from the private sector to the public sector. Here in the Arizona Transhumanist Party, and I won't describe it at length, we've been working on an initiative to try and do a similar thing. How would you tell people to do this in terms of resource management, in terms of getting these interventions moved from the private sector to the public sector? Do you have any advice on this better use of resources to get better longevity interventions in the public sector?
Right. So once again, there are various questions in this question, and there are various aspects and areas that we need to improve funding. First of all, we need to improve funding for longevity advocacy generally, and this includes both political party and non-partisan organizations, because a lot of people don't really understand the value of this kind of advocacy, of this kind of political involvement. And that need to change. People just want to have the concrete project, and it should be commercial, and it should bring revenues in 3 to 5 years, and that way they'll consider funding it. But they need to understand that we actually, as a society, we need to, or even as individual donors, we need to invest in education, in advocacy, in these kind of organizations like yours, like ours, because that's building the grassroots interest. That's building the actual public support for the whole field to move forward. Because imagine that somebody invents some pill, and people just, because of all those preconceptions, because of all those mind blocks, just won't buy it. So basically, what we're doing, we're creating the public demand for these therapies, and where there is demand, there is always an offer, right? So we are building the demand, so people should really invest some funding into creating this demand. And then the offer will follow sooner. A lot of people just want to invest in the actual offer when there is no demand, and it's not going to work. So yeah, is a major point. We need to increase funding for advocacy, for activism, for education. That's one thing. Another, and I'm speaking like to all the people who may listen. If it's some billionaire or some state organization, please give money to advocacy as well. In terms of management of resources, redistribution of resources, that's also a work of advocacy. With the private sectors, there's not much you can do to influence them, unless you have a product or a product in the pipeline that they're interested. But you really can influence the government. You can influence public spending to allocate some funds for this kind of public programs, both for development and application of the therapies when they're available. Because once again, this way people will be entitled to these therapies. Because these therapies come eventually from their taxes through this governmental spending, and that way they'll demand their share, right? If it will be only in the private sector, that there is no entitlement there unless you are the stock owner. I always advocate for increasing the public portion for this research as well as treatment, and you can do this through actually lobbying, either direct political involvement like yours, like your parties, or lobbying like we do. To increase funding, we're actually able to get some funds for research, but it's still very minimal. But we show that it is feasible. It is feasible, to make the government, to make the political system shift focus a little bit more in this direction. I wonder if it answers your question.
Yes, sir. Yes. So a recurring theme in our talk has been the idea that a critical mass of interest in longevity will hasten something like a longevity escape velocity. Possibly that difference, just as something shifting public opinion towards longevity, would be something that may save many tens or hundreds of millions of lives effectively. This something that would catch the popular imagination. And Paul Spiegel and I mentioned this conversation before. We talked about this in the context of a small nation state. San Marino and a few others were mentioned in this conversation. Developed a nation that is small in size and has a robust public health service and a reasonable degree of digitalization. And a relatively small legal fund even could help to, and also there's regulatory concerns in some of these countries to a higher or lower degree. San Marino maybe a little lower than some others of that size, but that are developed countries. But ultimately, this prospect of a small nation becoming a nation of immortalists, becoming a nation where the data science and early interventions become overwhelmingly the standard of care in that country, that could create I think of it almost like a reality show, a very fine example to the rest of the world. To quote another popular U.S. statesman, a shining city on a hill, a shining city of immortalists. That would, for such a thing to occur, it then has the rest of the world say, what are we doing in the running of our, in the use of our public health resources that we are not doing this? Do you see this idea or other ways of inspiring people? How do you see us progressing in this way? Again, no one has a crystal ball, but do you have suggestions for capturing the public imagination? This is the only kind of thing that maybe the USTP, one of the kinds of things that the USTP might be able to do is to pique folks' imagination in this regard.
That's right. So first of all, I would advise everybody to do whatever is possible, to think of creative ways, because of course your circumstances are different from mine. So whatever is possible in your environment, just go ahead and do it. I'm not saying you do that or do this. Just set this goal and then go toward it. But I definitely agree that small countries can be very helpful, in advancing the whole ecosystem globally. I think Israel can make a strong contribution. I'll be honest, but even thanks to some of our activities, even the ideas of transhumanism, not so much immortals, but transhumanism are quite mainstream in Israel. When you say you are transhumanist, you're not seen as a crazy person. It's just seen as another philosophy, and a positive, futuristic philosophy that people can embrace. And I always identify as a transhumanist. I'm in the press as a transhumanist. In some places, they think that if you identify as a transhumanist, your life is over. Nobody will ever talk with you. In Israel, I say I'm transhumanism, and the government still talks to me. So that's completely fine, and I encourage everybody, to do what they think is right and to go with their ideology, with their belief. But generally, I think the place of Israel will be really this kind of catalyst. I hope people will really learn from our experience, from the policy we already made, and from the programs we already have, and and take example. And also very important power for catalysis is binational cooperation, binational international cooperations, because if you have scientists in a project, even from two countries, that raises the quality of research dramatically, even in terms of citation impact. So I'm very strongly advocating for this kind of binational international consortiums, collaborations. That's a very important way one country can influence all the world, even if it is a small country like Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. There's and transhumanism and longevity efforts more broadly. It's very much a transnational undertaking, and I think this phenomena is seen in other kinds of organizing across third parties and across other entities. But in our party, that is very much the case. As evidenced by comment in our pre-interview that making a lot of calls to Skype at different times, and I apologize for my confusion on our time. You would think that I would be not making this mistake. I tried to call you a little bit early. But thank you for your patience with that, Dr. Stambler. This has been a wonderful talk, and please, everyone, do check the comments. These materials that we discussed, multidisciplinary perspectives, the text that we discussed, and check out longevityhistory.com. And first and foremost, for the purpose of this discussion, be reading the Transhumanist Handbook and Dr. Stambler's chapter in that, a wonderful edition. Thank you for doing this, sir. I had a nice time chatting with you. Enjoy your weekend, sir.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this educational work, this advocacy work. Please keep up doing what you're doing for the cause, and let's all do our best for the cause. That's my take-home message. Hope we'll talk again.
Yes, and longevity is job one, as far as I'm concerned, for transhumanists.
That's right. If you are dead, you can't do much of anything else. So that's why longevity is my personal main priority. And when we succeed, we can think of other. Of course, other areas are also important. If you can survive to tomorrow, you don't think about life extension. But generally, I think people should really see life extension as a top priority in the activities.
Yeah, and people think of this when you mention this. People think of it as almost poetic language, but there's a tremendous amount of information that's lost with every passing generation. People's work product, and that looking at a history of civilizations, that's sometimes been a factor where important advances have been lost because of these generational effects, and it's something that we are on the verge of putting an end to. And in doing so, it's another kind of takeoff effect that we could be seeing as a result of this. And it doesn't like these other calls for interest in a consensus. It's another argument for advancing a broad consensus on life extension. And I think that no one has more insights in these related disciplines, politics and medicine, than yourself. So I thank you for sharing them with us today.
Thank you.